Okay, here comes the fun part, where I try to explain Supermassive's most convoluted game ever. So, strap in, I guess? As usual, we're going to take this in chronological order, because that's the best way to keep things clear. That being said, since this is a game about time travel and alternate dimensions, it's more difficult than usual to structure events. So I'm going to focus on the actions of the game's central character, Augustine Lieber. The game starts and ends with her standing around in a robe, so it's clear enough that she's our most relevant access point to the story. The game also prominently features 3 different timelines, or dimensions, if you prefer, so we'll be labeling them as dimensions A, B, and C for clarity's sake. Normally I do a joke where I call them A, B, and 3, but I'm trying to inform here, so I'll briefly set annoying gags off to one side. So first off, we've got to start with a bit of an explanation, and a recommendation that you check out another video on the channel. Long story short, Augustine Lieber and Christine Gordon are the same person in different timelines. This seems to be true even if we don't really understand the details of how it happened. For example, we don't have the slightest idea when Augustine Lieber is from. Is she from the distant past and the first version of the Horlogium was explicitly magical and less mechanical? Is she from the distant future and she's cobbled together whatever version of the Horlogium she could with primitive technology? My own pet theory is that she was born Christine Gordon in the year 1963, grew up with no connection to Cedar Hills, which did not have a serial killer in that timeline, and then later when she discovered the entity and built the Horlogium, she wound up weaving another version of herself into the Frank Stone story. But we don't have any information about her past, sadly. Whenever she came from, one thing we know for sure. She discovered the existence of the entity's realm and became obsessed with the idea of linking it to our world, effectively freeing the entity from its interdimensional prison and sacrificing a world to it. What's a little unclear is her motive in doing this. A search for power or just an obsession with the dark secret at the heart of reality? We can't say just yet, as we learn, again, very little about her. What's clear is that at some point she invented or at least came into possession of the Horlogium, a machine for shifting between worlds and through time. This aided her in her research, both because she could access secrets lost to history and because she could use it to extend her life unnaturally, stealing the bodies of different versions of her grabbed from out of the multiverse. Over the centuries, she comes to believe that the entity is fascinated by, and pays close attention to, murderers. The more bloodthirsty and elaborate, the better. She decides to create a killer of her own, one specifically designed to catch the entity's eye, so that she can use him to draw the entity into the real world, claiming him for her own. Which brings us to Frank Stone. It's unclear how she initially discovers him, but he's perfectly suited to her purposes. After the death of his parents in a fire when he was a child, he was sent to live with his grandmother in Cedar Hills. We only see one piece of correspondence from her, but it's clear that she's quite deranged. Filled with contempt for all the people who surround her, she taught Frank that he was special and more important than the rest of them, that he had a destiny awaiting him. This abusive childhood turned him into a resentful, violent individual, putting no value on the lives of other people. He had no trouble robbing and assaulting them, which led to him being arrested and jailed for his crimes. It's in the prison that Augustine, now working as a psychiatrist, approached him in the guise of a rehabilitation program. In point of fact, she was taking this angry, directionless man and constructing a worldview that fit his existing mental issues. She suggested that his propensity for violence, rather than a character flaw, could be a heroic trait. After all, historical epics are filled with the stories of celebrated mass murderers, from Gilgamesh to John Brown. She reinforced his grandmother's belief that the world was filled with corruption that needed to be purged. She even went so far as to refer to Frank by his middle name, Norman, which is what his grandmother called him. Convincing him of the necessity of violence, she taught him about the entity, then allowed his violent fantasies to take shape, spurred on by dark dreams. He designs a costume for himself, attempting to transform him into the creature that he's seen in his dreams. There's a question of causality here. Does the entity transform him into a hideous monster because it's the image that existed in Frank Stone's heart and dreams? Or was the entity, who exists outside of normal time, already aware of the form Frank would one day take and simply sent visions into Frank's dreams, giving him a preview of his destiny that he felt compelled to make a reality? He began his murder spree at Augustine's instruction, killing Dorothy Clay and setting her house on fire, then murdering George Calhern and his girlfriend Joyce, again attempting to conceal the crime and make it look like an accident. He murders 2 more people, a total of 5 so far, but feels unsure of his cause. He's been told that the town is corrupt. that it's his job to cleanse its sin, but he doesn't know exactly how killing people accomplishes that goal. His rather pedestrian obsession with the traditionally Puritan concept of sin means that he got to enjoy murdering 2 people having sex in a car, but he isn't sure why stabbing an old woman while she slept was a moral act. Augustine decides to guide Frank more directly, encouraging him to transform into a more beastly version of himself. She tells him that the source of evil in town is the Cedar Hills Steel Corporation, because its founder Howard Tester was a witch that had corrupted everything. She convinces Frank that Howard's spawn will one day go on to do hideous acts, so he'll have to stop them before they can. She provides him with a list of Tester's evil descendants and tells him to get rid of them using the factory as his killing grounds. Now, we don't know if these are actually his illegitimate or even legitimate children, or if it's just something she made up, but this is what Frank Stone believes is happening. The names are DP, BK, LR, and JR. The BK might be a typo, since we see a reference to him killing an E. Kessler in his notebook. The DP is Dwight Allen Parker, who he kidnaps and keeps under the mill for some time before killing him. While we can't say for sure who the LR is, there's likely another unknown victim in there, since Frank makes it all the way down the list to JR, or as he's better known, Jaime Rivera, the baby that Frank kidnaps. It's this kidnapping that brings Sam Green into the story during the game's first playable section. This is Timeline A, which the rest of the timelines relevant to Augustine's plan mostly branch off of. I say mostly because while Sam A's eye and shoulder injuries are reflected in Timelines B and C, it seems that Jaime's death as a child is a somewhat rarer occurrence. Whatever happens to Jaime in the A timeline, the radio interview with Tom confirms that in the B timeline, where the murder mill is produced in the game, Sam saved the child. If Jaime is saved, then this conversation between Linda C and Sam A is about Sam not breaking the camera in Timeline C. But if the baby dies, it's a conversation about how Sam A doesn't know that Jaime was one of the people who worked on Linda C's version of Murder Mill. The important part is that Augustine's plan mostly works. The entity appears to collect Frank Stone, just as she'd hoped, but she simply takes the body and leaves, without generating the stable connection between the entity's realm and Earth. Augustine has to come up with a new plan. She realizes that while Frank's body has been taken to the entity's realm, his soul, or at least some pieces of it, are still inside the mill, trapped within the place he died and the bodies of his victims. So she comes up with a plan to capture enough pieces of his soul that she can summon him back from the entity's realm, finally creating the bridge she's planned for so long. That plan is the movie Murder Mill. While we don't know all of the details, she arranges for a version of herself, Christine Gordon, to move to Cedar Hills and start making the film. Then she provides the filmmakers with a magic camera that can capture ghosts, and the main action of the game begins. The game follows the adventures of the Murder Mill crew in Timeline B, where Jaime is alive and Bonnie dies no matter what else happens. They're far from unique, however. As we can see in Augustine's film vault, she's collected thousands of versions of the film. At least one of them is from a world where the team never found out about Frank Stone and instead made a movie about Evan McMillan, the Trapper. The goal is to find little pieces of Frank's soul from all across the multiverse. Each crew might have gotten just a fraction of the power she needed, so this had to be done at a large scale. Augustine couldn't just go around and film the mill herself because A, Frank would probably kill her, and 2, it would be a huge amount of work. By placing Christine in Cedar Hills and selling her the camera, she creates a functionally unlimited number of variant versions of the Murder Mill footage that she can harvest at her leisure in a much less dangerous fashion. Now, we don't get a lot of information about what happens to the crew of Murder Mill after the film is completed, since we only see the Timeline C version of these characters. Bonnie gets married and has a daughter named Madison. Robert is haunted by his experiences and turns to drugs. Linda becomes a filmmaker and makes horror films inspired by her experiences. As for Jaime and Christine, there's no information about what happened to them. All we know is that Madison has never met her uncle, and he's probably dead. Her saying, "I never met him," versus "I've never met him," suggests that meeting him is something that is no longer on the table. The only character we do know a little bit about post-Murder Mill is Sam A, who became obsessed with what happened at the mill and managed to find out about the nature of the entity, and even joined an organization of people actively trying to stop the pro-entity organization, the Black Veil. It's via his connection to this group that he finds out about Augustine's plan. She's had a version of herself, Augustine C, collecting all of the pieces of the film from every universe she can, promising her that if she can complete the film, the entity will reward her with some kind of power. This is a lie, of course. told by the original Augustine to keep Augustine C toiling away at her work, collecting and editing the Frank Stone film. With the film assembled, Augustine is ready to complete the ritual and summon Frank Stone, creating a stable connection between Timeline C's Earth and the entity's dimension. Like all of the entity's rituals, this requires a human sacrifice. So Augustine C invites her own world's versions of Madison, Linda, and Stan, a scumbag who scammed Robert out of his piece of the film in at least some of the timelines. The plan is to have one of them be consumed by Frank Stone, anchoring the film version of Frank in the real world by merging him with someone from World C. With Frank Stone's soul back in the body that was created by the entity, and part of that body made of someone from World C, the bridge is finally created. And the entity absorbs Timeline C's Earth. The world has now become part of the entity. As we can see, it now has the ability to manifest its horrible talons in the real world, consuming anyone grievously injured. Sam, Linda, or Maddie can be sacrificed here, but whether they are or not, Frank Stone will always kill Augustine C, completing the job that the real Augustine was using her for. Those aren't the end of Augustine's plans, however. Even as the game ends, we've never actually learned exactly what she hoped to accomplish by bringing the entity into World C. The fact that in the post-credits scene, we see her back at the Horlogium, summoning a new version of herself to use as a helper, suggests that she has another scheme in mind. Does she hope to actually gain the kind of power that Augustine C thought she was in line for? Does she have a scheme to take control of the entity's power herself? We're going to have to wait for the sequel, or at least the Frank Stone chapter, probably coming this December, before we get answers to those questions. So that's all the secrets behind the plot of the casting of Frank Stone. At least, all the stuff we know and strongly expect happened. There's still lots of questions, of course. Where did the magic camera come from? Why do the locket and mirror kill people who try to travel through the film? Was this the first entity trial? How did Augustine summon a murder of crows and use it to trash the curio shop and kill the owner's cat, forcing him to sell the place? Okay, so maybe that last one isn't an important question, but it's still super weird that she did that. We'll be back soon with videos about various references in the game, a look at goofs and weird choices, a further explanation of how we can be sure Christine and Augustine are the same person, and more! Is there anything else in the story that's still confusing you? I'm sure we can figure it out. For now, though, I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time and you'd like to see more of those buttons coming up to help with that, questions, comments, anything still puzzling you about Frank Stone, put it in the comments section below the video. Play my game, Clown in the Woods. It's available for free over at itch.io. We'll see you back here for more Frank Stone videos, but until then, I'll say that's right. Au revoir.